Money now at 6:15. On Wednesday, the U.S. Department of Labor gave its latest monthly report on inflation. In June, consumer prices remained unchanged from April, while the national unemployment rate fell from 3.4% to 3.3%. Now, the latest inflation data also suggests that consumer prices on many basic necessities might be finally starting to ease. And financial advisor Mark Gravicheski is now joining us on Zoom to break down the numbers. Good morning, Mark.
Morning to you, Charles. Good to see you again, even though it is a little bit hot and humid.
Oh, just a little bit. I know you said you got that fan running, so.
Yeah, it's like a Dutch oven in my office here.
Yeah, don't turn
Really
that off
is.
anytime soon. But
No.
all right, let's get into it. So what did this latest data say about the state of inflation?
Well, on the positive side, Charles, consumer prices in May were unchanged, and that ended a streak of 47 consecutive months, almost 4 years, where consumer prices have risen on a month-over-month basis. Granted, consumer prices didn't decline last month, but again, for the first time in 47 months, they didn't increase. The national rate of inflation also fell from 3.4 down to 3.3%, a little bit more good news. This means that consumer prices on average are still 3.3% higher than they were 12 months ago. And finally, we look at what's called core inflation, which strips out that more volatile and seasonal food and energy prices. Core inflation fell from 3.6 down to 3.4% last month. So overall, Charles, Wall Street was quite pleased with this latest inflation data.
Right. So what's the inflation outlook for the rest of the year then?
Well, even though inflation is currently at 3.3%, remember the ultimate goal is to return to that ideal target rate of just 2%. But that still remains a significant challenge. When you kind of dive into the details and the metrics of these recent inflation reports, there are still a lot of spending categories that we call sticky. In other words, they've been quite resistant in wanting to decline, and the cost of shelter is a great example. So the general consensus on Wall Street is that inflation will likely stay either at or near 3% for the rest of the year.
Okay, and one of the areas most impacted by rising prices over the past 3 years has been basic necessities. So are we starting to see some relief in these consumer items?
You're right, Charles. One of the hallmarks of this current inflationary cycle is that some of the largest price increases we've seen over the past 3 years have been on those everyday basic necessities. Think of energy and food and clothing and shelter. But we are starting to finally see some type of relief in these items. Last month, energy prices fell by 2%. However, energy prices, this is a very volatile category, and energy prices are still up 3.7% over the past 12 months. Food prices rose only 0.1% in May and are up a more reasonable 2.1% over the past year. Clothing prices actually declined by 0.3% last month and are up only 0.8% in the past year. But again, one of the basic necessities that remains, sticky, so to speak, is the cost of shelter. Last month, shelter costs rose another 0.4% and are up a hefty 5.4% over the past 12 months. But as we can see, these inflationary pressures on these everyday basic necessities are at least starting to improve some.
Right. And lastly, one of the big concerns has been high interest rates. I mean, they've been very stubborn. So did this latest inflation report provide any indication on when the Federal Reserve, would or might start lowering those interest rates?
Yeah, great question, Charles. Look, even though this was one of the better inflation reports we've seen in quite some time, the Federal Reserve wants to see more confirmation that this inflation problem has been tamed before it starts lowering those interest rates. When you dive into the details of this inflation data, there are still a number of red flags that suggest that inflation will likely remain higher for longer. And that means the Fed will likely have to keep interest rates higher for longer. Most likely the Fed will be able to start gradually lowering interest rates. The key word being gradually. Maybe towards the end of the year, possibly in December, but depending on how this inflation data kind of plays out over the next few months, that might easily get pushed back to the start of 2025. We'll have to wait and see over the next few months.
Right. All righty, Mark. Well, as always, thank you so much for your expertise, and we will see you next Monday.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your week, Charles.
All right. You too, Mark. Thank you. Well, now here's